podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. DirecTV Stream is your home for baseball. With the most regional sports networks of any streaming TV provider, DirecTV Stream gives you the most local baseball games. And that means more doubleheaders, triple plays, and no-hitters from your local team. Watch this season's action on DirecTV Stream. Get the best of live TV and on-demand at directtv.com/baseball. Regional sports networks are available with choice package or higher and may vary by zip code and package. Not available in all areas. Compatible device required.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podcast with me, James Gray, him, Calvin Betton, and also George Belshaw. Thank you for listening as always, and thank you for leaving us a 5-star review, as several of you have over the last couple of weeks. We are driving that average up, we're flying up the charts, and we can only do it with your help. Most recently, and I apologise, Marta, for mispronouncing your name, Marta Kwijdala, I believe. She left us a 5-star review and says, "Great, one of my favourite podcasts to listen to, informative and funny at the same time." Well, we do try, Marta. Thanks very much. We've also had an email. You can always get in touch with us via email, lovetennispod@gmail.com. It's from Miles Hutchinson. I don't know where he's from. You can always say where you're from if you enjoy. It's old school radio, that, isn't it? It's Miles in Little Swaffing. I don't know where Miles is from. Maybe it is Little Swaffing. He says, "I've been listening to you for roughly a year now, and you're now firmly my favourite tennis podcast of the two I listen to." I'm contractually obliged not to mention the other one that he listens to, but you can probably all guess. Thank you, and please keep going. Keep up with the insights, the honesty, the no-holds-barred approach. I love the technical analysis and also your perspectives on the more psychological aspects of the game. Oh, and the light touch and the humour. Thanks again, and all the best to you. Thanks, Miles. Thank you so much for getting in touch. It's great to hear from listeners, to know that you're out there. I see you as ones and zeros on the screen in the analytics, but it's always nice to know that you're humans as well. We've got loads of tennis to talk about this week. I know many of you have been asking for Calvin's Minute Explainers, Minute Tennis as we called it, I think, or Minute Tennis. It's a pun that really only works written down. So he's going to talk to us about clay court tennis and playing on clay. We'll talk about Emma Raducanu and the Billie Jean King Cup. We'll also talk about Novak Djokovic, Alejandro Davidovich Fokina, or ADF as he will be for the rest of the pod, Stefanos Tsitsipas, and a little bit about the number one ranking as well, which we think might fly around the world a little bit in the next couple of weeks. But there is, I think, only one place to start, certainly in the UK, and that is Emma Raducanu. She was in action over in Prague over at the weekend. A few of our colleagues were there as well, who took Easter away from their families to go to the Czech Republic at this time of year, which I think is lovely. She picked up her first top 50 win since the US Open. It was her first professional match on clay, would you believe it? It was her first singles match in the Billie Jean King Cup. George, I know she was absolutely thumped by Marketa Vondrousova, but in fairness, she is a French Open finalist, so no great shame in that. What is your assessment of Emma Raducanu on clay?
Mixed, I would say. It was good to see her get off to a winning start. I mean, we spoke a little bit at the end of last week about kind of the strength and depth the Czechs have at their disposal. I'm not sure where Martincova actually would be in terms of my ranking of Czech players, but she's probably scraping the top 5, and she's still a top 50 player.
She's the Czech number 6, I think.
Number 6, there we go. So, I think that just goes to highlight what they've got on offer. But that was a good win for Radekanu. I think I'm right in saying that's her first top 50 win since the US
Open semi-final, I think, was the last time she beat a player in the top 50. In fact, that was the last time she took a set off a player in the top 50. And Martincova, in fairness, I think he certainly was 50 in the world exactly.
Yeah. So, you can't say that's not encouraging. As I'm sure we'll come on to more, the Vondrussova defeat is pretty disappointing. That was a player she's beaten before. I know Vondrousova's actually come back into some form since they met at Wimbledon. So, maybe that result has been taken a little bit differently, given her kind of career span. And as you said, she has been a French Open finalist before. But I think probably the bigger concern with that, and I think this is something we've said time and time again about Radekanu and where she needs to get to, is kind of these blisters. And I think Anne Kjothavong said she needs to be more robust. And my worry for her at the minute is we're talking about someone getting used to the tour and used to the rigors of the tour, but she's not had a very rigorous season. I mean, she's not played that many matches. I'm pretty concerned about how badly she's holding up physically at the moment.
Calvin, when you see a young player, struggling, is this a thing that happens? Is there a period in everyone's career when the workload goes up and there's an adjustment period in terms of stuff like blisters? She's had that hand blister out in Australia and now these blisters on her feet and losing all her toenails. Is that just something that happens at one point in everyone's career?
No, I wouldn't say so, really. The blisters thing is really weird because the blisters, I guess, in any sport would come if you're coming back from an injury or something and they'd start coming in training, but she hasn't really been injured. I don't understand why she'd be getting blisters. You'd think going really into the medical sort of side of it, is basically if you do something, if you play more tennis, your skin becomes, you get sort of calluses on them that stops it from getting blisters. And it's the same with your feet. Your feet become hard, so they don't get blisters. So it's really weird that she's getting them because even though she's not been playing matches, she'll have been training, and it's the same sort of thing. So, and also in terms of her not playing much, I've said this in previous weeks, she's never really played much. Like throughout her sort of mid to late junior career and start of her professional career, she's never really played much tennis.
But to kind of, those 2 points seem to talk to each other, right? So if she's never really played much tennis and she is now playing a lot of tennis, is it that her pads on her feet and her hands have never had this kind of workload before?
No, because she'll be training. What I'm talking about when I say she's not been playing much, she's not had many matches. She's always taken sort of lengthy times out of tournaments for injury or one reason or another. But she's
has
been
generally
training
always been on court. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, look, and when I say you need to be training a lot, basically if you train for an hour and a half a day, you're not going to be getting blisters. It's not like you need to be going 4 hours a day every day to not get blisters. Like you won't. Yeah, it's pretty. Besides I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that she's not getting blisters. She clearly is, but I don't have an answer as to why she's getting blisters at this stage of her career.
I don't want to compare her plight to mine this week, but I've been having a bit of a disaster with blisters myself in the past week.
But George, you've had a knee injury, so you can't hit a tennis ball. So I dread to think what you're getting blisters from.
It's crutches. It's agonising, those things. I've rubbed my hands. Someone's told me I need to put socks over them or something, or some sort of taping. But
honestly, a good pair of socks fixes a lot of problems. I am currently talking to you from a noisy room with a microphone covered in a pair of socks in an effort to deal with some of the muffle. So, if anyone's got any advice for George on dealing with crutches and crutching blisters, lovetennispod@gmail.com. Or stick it in a 5-star review. I'll definitely read it, I'll tell you that much. Troubling for Radekanu. This is obviously, as I mentioned, not her first blister issue. She also gave this detail that made kind of headlines back in the UK because it was something that she said that she'd lost all the toenails on her feet from the. Is that a clay thing? Is that a transition to clay thing, or is that again just something that happens? I've never had it happen to me. No one knows. No one has an answer as to why we lose.
I've never lost a toenail on the tennis court, but we're near that standard. So
I've coached a lot of players who've done the transition from hard to clay to hard, and I've never known the toenails thing happen. I'll say it. I can't say it on this sort of slight subject, and I can't really go into more detail, but I'm told that we might not be far off from another coaching change in the Raducanu setup.
I mean, Calvin, in fairness, while that does sound like well-sourced insider information, you could probably say that. You could have said that at any point in the last 12 months, and you'd have been right.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes, George. Logically, we can say we're not far off, given she changes every 3 or 4 months, and she changed 3 or 4 months ago. So
yeah, I'm not. You know what? And to kind of not even to play devil's advocate, I genuinely believe this. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I don't necessarily think that. All right, it may be happening for whatever reason. I know there's a lot of people around Emma Raducanu, but if I were a player, I would want some consistency. But I also think a little bit like Andy Murray in the last few months. And again, I know there are different reasons there, but I'm not averse to getting a lot of different voices into a camp and lots of different ideas as to how to go somewhere, George.
I don't mind that theory in general, and I'm sure Calvin would have his own thoughts on that for me. But if I was a coach, and I think of this in any sport, I'd want a body of about, I want a season or, maybe something like 30, 40 matches. So you can say to the player, here's what we've been doing. Here's how you started. Here's where you got to, something like that you can work with. I mean, she can't have played more than about 10 matches this season, like really, because she's been losing first or second round every week. So I don't really, from Belts' perspective, I'd be pretty frustrated if she's then getting rid of me at that stage, because she's played probably fewer matches this year than she played in the entirety of the US Open. Maybe it's a 10-match rotation that she's going for. Like, that's why the guy she knew, whose name Richardson, got canned after 10 matches at the US Open. I've won all 10 of these. That's your stint. But it's pretty strange if she is going to do that again. Although I'm sure we said last week he's definitely going to be in Stuttgart belt. So
yeah,
can't be that imminent.
Calvin, I mean, when you work with a player, how long do you think it takes for you to get to a point where it's like, you've got your feet under the table, the ins and outs of the player, and you should have made some progress by now?
It varies, although I often say that with coaches, you should be able to have improved something relatively significantly in 6 weeks. Right. If you're 6 weeks in, and I think that's the case in any sport as well. Also, I'm not saying you can make a huge difference, but I would think if you're working on a one-to-one basis regularly, and look, and that's what I'm talking about, one-to-one basis. Like sometimes, like some of the jobs that I do, like players, because they don't have loads of money, will have me for 1 week, and then they won't be able to have me for the next 3 weeks, so then I'll come in after that. But if you're doing like in that situation where you're full-time, 3 to 4 hours a day, I would think that there should be some improvement in certain areas of the game in a 6 week period, and then build on that and then keep going. And I think it's, look, if she's decided that the coach isn't very good, and I don't know Torben Belts at all, so I don't know if he's a good coach or not, and she's decided he's not and she needs a change, that's fair enough. There's no point just sticking with it. And she might have got that 6 week period and thought, I'm no better than I was 6 weeks ago, and then it's time to move on. But you'd worry that there's an element of, I don't know whether it's Emma herself or her agents or her parents or whatever, just not really taking advice and not listening. And if we're getting into a realm of, right, that isn't what I want to hear, so I'm moving on to the next person, that then becomes a problem, I think, because then I think you can get into the habit of that.
Calvin, this might be a really stupid, obvious question, but how are you as a coach pointing out to the players you're coaching what differences you're making? Are you say like in a 6 week period, you should be able to say tangibly what you've improved, but if they're not playing matches, where are you kind of tracking that level of improvement?
I think now with data and things, so say that you were working on, say that a player wanted to improve their serve, and I think then you can simply look at things like first serve percentage, points won on first serve, points won on second serve, and go, this is where we were 6 weeks ago, this is where we are now. And not just in one match. I'm not saying choose a match where they've served at 30% first serves and then randomly choose a match where they've served at 70% and then go, that's the difference. That kind of fluctuation can happen. But I think it's overall and just on things like that. You can generally find some data, and I think that is it's a bit different in tennis because there's always some level of subjectivity with data, I think, as well. As I've had a mini argument with someone on Twitter last night and this morning about, if anyone is interested in, what's the difference between a forced error and an unforced error.
I mean, that we could have a whole podcast on that, I think.
Yeah, we can talk about that later, actually. I think that might be an interesting thing to go into on the City when we talk Tsitsipas. But yeah, I think it's generally data, George, and a feeling. And look, you can ask players as well. As a coach, I tend to ask a lot of questions. I think that's a sort of coaching technique that I use. I'll ask, how does that feel? Where are we on that? Any way you think that could be better? And I think say you're working on second serves and 6 weeks down the line, there's no improvement in the second serve. I think, you're then going to be asking questions of the coach.
Well, we'll see how that evolves and when a potential change might happen, if it does. I guess at the moment we are still speculating a little bit. As you say, George, she is out in Stuttgart this week. I don't think she's playing today. We're recording this on Monday because I wouldn't want to blow my Radekanu kind of tickets too early in the week if I were the Stuttgart organisers. She's got Storm Sanders, I believe, in the first round, and she's the number 8 seed, so has a decent draw on the way through. How do you think she might go here, George?
Not beyond round 3, or is it the quarterfinals by then? I think she's due to meet Swiatek then. I think she's got a winnable couple of matches. Sanders as a qualifier, and then is it Georgi potentially?
Okay. Take your word for it, George. Haven't got the draw in front of me.
Okay.
Getting there. Slowly.
I can't remember the two, but I looked at them and I was thinking, okay, that's just another sort of match that I'm wanting to see her start to win. And then it's Swiatek, who at the minute is on a ridiculous run, as we may talk about shortly, where she's won about 19 matches in a row, and in the last 15 has won one of the sets 6-level, 6-1. So I wouldn't be rating Raducanu's chances too highly in that one if she does get there. But
I'd say she's guaranteed an Italian opponent in the second round if she gets there. Jasmine Paolini or Camilla Giorgi. I mean, I'm not overly optimistic about either of those as an opponent, to be perfectly honest. Like, both players have played a lot on clay. And obviously Camilla Giorgi is hugely experienced and actually is in a little bit of a career peak. She's had a really good sort of 12, 18 months or so. She won that title last year. So I wouldn't be overly optimistic about her chances in Stuttgart. But we'll see how that goes. Radekanu, George has got an early contender for the most ludicrous Radekanu headline of the season from The Express. Emma Raducanu retains public backing for now, but Gold Rush puts it at risk. George, I used to work at The Express, as many people will know, and I'll be honest, I'm quite glad I'm out of it. I used to have quite a good spidey sense for what an article is actually about from the headline. I have no idea what this is about. Tell me more.
I think it's like an editorial or something. I mean, the tagline is, Emma Raducanu needs to tread carefully if she wants to fulfill her potential on the court and continue to count on the backing of tennis fans, which I just thought was absolutely bizarre. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure there's that many people who are like actively invested in tennis enough to be tracking what she's up to on court. They'll see like flashes, like Grand Slams, like how she's going on. But I really, really think they're kind of over-egging the pudding of people like caring what she's doing, and particularly being that bothered about how many sponsors she has. I know we've spoken a little bit about that just because we are invested in tennis, doing a tennis podcast. I'm pretty sure if you ask like the average Joe blogs, what do you reckon of Emma Raducanu's sponsorship deals, they'll have absolutely nothing to say about it.
I don't know. I think actually that is because that's when people see her. Like, because let's be honest, the tennis this weekend was on the BBC. That is incredibly rare. Outside of Wimbledon, people won't see her, like your normal person, but they will see her because she's on billboards, she's on TV ads, she's on sports ads. And I actually think that people will be more aware of her because of her deals with Vodafone, Tiffany, Dior, BA, Evian than her tennis.
I'm not saying they won't be aware of her, but then I'm not saying they then make the connection. Hey, what's she doing on that billboard? What's she up to in her matches? You know what I mean? I don't think that necessarily.
The general public can't work out that she's not actually on the billboard. Why is she? What's she doing up there? That's very strange.
I'm just saying. I think like you're either invested in tennis and the matches aren't going that well, and you see the billboard and you might think, oh, she shouldn't have that many billboards if she's not winning many matches. Or you're not following the tennis. You're seeing her on the billboard. You're like, oh, that's the girl who won the US Open last year. She's really good. Yeah, good for her. I don't really see how the two things come together as like, billboard range. I must see her match results to see if she's worthy of this billboard.
You got to love the Express, haven't you? That Emma Raducanu needs to tread carefully, but Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak don't, in order to keep the public backing. And also, like, we have a problem with Emma Raducanu making money on things outside of her actual day job, but we don't have an issue with certain Tory MPs making money outside of their actual day job. Like, remarkable stuff from the Express.
You're listening to the Love Politics podcast with Calvin Betson. Just for the record, the article we're talking about is by Neil Squires, who's the chief sports writer at the Express, and is a really nice guy who I used to work with. And in fairness, just having skimmed the article, it's relatively balanced. Neil doesn't write the headlines, in fairness. Some online writers do. Neil's an old school guy, and he certainly doesn't. So a little bit of a stitch.
I think on a serious note on that, I think on a serious note, that I'm still not sure. Like, the public the public are quite strange with it, because I still get people coming up to me going like, "Oh, was it a fluke that she won the US Open or something?" But I don't think tennis is like that much in the public mindset, and I think the people who are interested in tennis will kind of know the situation. So I don't think they're that going to give her that much grief. And like, what's the worst that can come out of it? They're still going to cheer for her at Wimbledon and Eastbourne and that kind of thing. They're not going to boo her because she makes a load of money out of Porsche.
I mean, that's the question. It really is like, if and let's say that a few people in the public decided they didn't like Emma Raducanu. So what? Like, loads of people don't like Lewis Hamilton. It's never really held him back.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if you look at where Murray started from in terms of popularity rankings, he always tells that story about walking around at Wimbledon and someone saying on the phone, "Oh, I just saw that Scottish W word walking past me." I don't see that happening to her anytime soon. I think she's on a pretty solid ground at the minute. Yeah,
I think most people as well, like, kind of recognise that she's 19, right? Like, she's a young girl. Like, no, I don't think anyone. The fact that she won the US Open is incredible, but I don't think many people expect a huge amount from her. Like, even, if she was, I think, maybe had been established in tennis for 10 years, I think there would be real outcry and would have been sustained outcry that she hadn't said anything about Peng Shuai, or like really, especially as someone who obviously has Chinese heritage and makes, frankly, a lot of money out in China. I think there would have been real public outcry about that. But actually there hasn't been really, other than a few lunatics on Twitter, because she's young, and I think everyone recognises that she's just starting out and therefore doesn't really have the weight or necessarily know where she is in the world to do that.
But also, I think if she doesn't win another match before the grass season this season, she's going to fill every stadium that she's on in the grass. And I would even say she'll obviously win matches, but if she doesn't win a match between Wimbledon and the US Open, she'll still pull in huge crowds in New York. And then if she doesn't win a match before Wimbledon 2023, she'll still fill every stadium that she's on in Britain. So it won't affect any public perception of her.
Yeah, and I'm not being funny. I mean, if we think about someone like Laura Robson, for example, who, obviously didn't win a Grand Slam, but started really well in her career, and people knew who she was. The only question I've had about Laura Robson in the last 5 years, if people has not been like that involved in tennis, is Laura Robson playing this year? Whatever happened to her? If she's still going, what's going on? It's never like, "Oh, Laura Robson was totally awful. She never did anything with her career." For casual fans. So I do think there's probably quite a disconnect between people who are engaged in the sport and not, I suppose.
Yes, I think so too. Anyway, Emma Raducanu was playing in the Billie Jean King Cup. Not that I think a lot of people might have been able to tell you that she was playing this weekend, and not many people would have been able to tell you the competition she was playing in. I saw at least 4 comments on social media that said, "I wonder how she'll get on in the next round after she beat Martincova." It, of course, was a team tie, which Britain lost 3-2. A bizarre match from Harriet Dart against, is it Linda Fruitova, who I think is a pretty highly rated 16-year-old who was chucked in, that she could have sealed the tie. Pretty remarkable from Dart to go 6-love, 5-2 up. And then I think she had a problem with her hand. She was sort of dabbing away at it, and then lost the second set. And then won the third. So, I mean, all credit to her. Clay is not her surface, as we've discussed. As you say in the notes, George, we were never likely to beat the Czechs, and probably even if it did come down to the doubles, I think they were still significant favourites, and they did. They triumphed 3-2. Any other notable stories from around the Billie Jean King Cup groups, George?
I think the one that stood out for me was just Swiatek's continued absolute tearing up of the tour. I think she won a match as like 6-1, 6-love, 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 and I think it was Buzonescu and what's the one called, begins with a P.
Andrea Priscariu.
Not like top 10 players, but the fact of the matter is every single match at the minute, 15 in a row, she's won a set 6-love or 6-1. So she's doing this consistently. And, we've spoken a bit about her taking the number 1 ranking and kind of proving she deserves it after Barty's gone. I mean, she's looking so ridiculously good at the minute. If she carries this on, through to the French Open, blows people away there, then, really exciting time for winning women's tennis in terms of having someone who can be this brutally dominant and, lay the gauntlet down for other people to capture.
Yeah, absolutely marmalising result from Świątek, who I don't think I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen someone win 2 matches in a team weekend and drop 1 game. I mean, pretty absurd. And as you say, Priscari, who I don't know a huge amount about, and she's pretty inexperienced. I think she's 320 in the world, but Băsănescu's been a top 20 player one time or another. So. Pretty one-sided stuff there in Radom. And I think they sold tickets very well for that tie as well, kind of off the back of Świątek's good form. I was speaking to a Polish journalist about it, and he said that they basically had this big extra marketing push off the back of it, and it went really well. So, good for Polish tennis, which is obviously in a bit of a boom with Hubert Hurkacz going well as well. Now, it's time to bring back a feature that I know so many people have been
popular demand.
But which is a phrase I don't think has ever been used about Calvin Betton. So it's delightful to be one of the first to say it. Minute tennis, where Calvin takes a complicated concept in tennis and turns it into something simple in the space of a minute. Now, this week is slightly complicated because we wanted to specifically talk about clay court tennis, and there's so many different elements to it. But we thought we'd focus on the fact that British players generally aren't very good on clay. So I suppose the question that Calvin will be trying to answer in a minute, and then we might ask him some follow-ups afterwards, is why clay is the perfect surface to develop your game and why British tennis has suffered because of it. Calvin, you're on.
It's the perfect surface to develop your game because it's slower. So you have to find different ways of winning points other than hitting the ball hard. It takes different types of spins differently, so you have to generally open the court up with different spins, different shapes of ball, different paces, and you can't just basically hit through the ball flat, which is what we tend to develop in Britain for reasons that I'm sure we'll come on to in the question. The reason why British players tend not to be very good on it is because we don't have enough clay courts in Britain for 2 main reasons. One is climate, and another is the cost of making clay courts, the cost of developing clay courts, and tennis clubs tend not to want it for that reason. There's cheaper ways to put tennis courts down. There's cheaper tennis courts. And on top of that, we don't have many clubs anymore. And tennis centres definitely don't want clay courts because they don't want to spend the money on them and they don't want to maintain them.
Calvin, that is very impressive to hit the minute almost spot on. Listeners at home won't have been able to see George trying to do a 10-second countdown with his fingers and then forgetting how to count when he got to 6 to 5. To go from 2 hands to 1 was too tough a transition for George. Really interesting stuff there, Calvin, especially about trying to build clay courts in the UK. I understand the LTA, I think, has some European clay courts and some synthetic clay courts. Is that right? And are they that different? Could you walk onto one and go, this is synthetic clay?
They're entirely different. Synthetic clay or artificial clay isn't a clay court. It's AstroTurf. It's basically what you used to play on. I guess now they have 4G pitches that we all play football on, but anyone of my age and maybe a little bit younger, we used to play on AstroTurf courts. And you still have AstroTurf tennis courts as well. That's basically what artificial clay is. They're just red instead of green, and the sand has been put in a kiln to make it red as well, as opposed to normal brown sand. So it's not even clay top dressing; it's just sand. So it's basically the only similarity to a clay court is that you can slide on it, but the pace, an AstroTurf court is fast, and an artificial clay court is fast, and it skids through, which a clay court doesn't do. It does the opposite of that. So artificial clay courts are absolute rubbish. I despise them.
And you mentioned the sliding. I spoke to one of your mates, Dan Kiernan, who runs a tennis academy in Spain, about this earlier in the week, and we talked about the movement compared to the tennis. In percentage terms, what percentage of the challenge of moving to clay if you've not played on it is movement, and what percentage of it is just the tennis and the different spins? It's
at least 50% moving on a clay court, because you can't really. I've often had people ask me to teach them to move on a clay court, and it's one of those that you can't really teach. It's basically something you develop through playing on it more and more. You can't just sort of teach someone how to slide, because you have to slide. People think you slide after the hit, but that's not. You slide into the hit, and that's the difficulty.
So tomorrow morning, Calvin Betton is promoted to chief executive of the Lawn Tennis Association, what's the first thing he does with regards to clay courts in the UK? Does he put more in? Does he arrange more finances for top players to go abroad and spend more time on clay? What do you do?
The problem is, like I said, George, is the climate doesn't help because it rains a lot here and it's cold and they freeze up pretty quick. Clay courts, you can't play on them when they're frozen, that sort of thing. So one of the things I was surprised that never happened is down at the National Tennis Centre, they used to have 2 clay courts with a canopy over them. They weren't indoor clay courts, but they had a canopy, and that was an excellent facility they had there. But in sort of classic LTA way, they've done away with that and put some courts of an entirely different sport up in paddle. So we've done away with the one good thing that they did at the National Tennis Centre, I think. But I'm surprised, that a few more places don't have covered in terms of canopy clay courts. I think that would solve a little bit of the problem. But again, the problem comes that tennis clubs, and there's not as many clubs as there was 20 years ago, but clubs don't want to spend the money on clay courts. You need somebody to maintain them on a regular, even a daily basis, to roll them, to spike them, to to put the top dressing on them. When the lines come up, you need someone to put the lines back down. They don't want to spend them. And the tennis centres, which we have more of, which are kind of the old pay-as-you-play places, they definitely don't want clay courts. They're council run. They want to lay some cement courts, and that's it. They can forget about them then. So it's not really. I don't really see as there's an obvious problem other than some of the places in the south of England, maybe it's difficult in the north because it's cold a lot and it rains a lot. Some of the places in the south could have some more canopied clay courts. That's one of the things I'd look to do.
You'd accidentally stumbled upon one of my questions I was going to come to next, which was about paddle or padel. I once got teased for calling it padel, but I'm sure some people.
No, I call it padel. Yeah, padel, yeah. I'm with you.
Absolutely.
It's not spelt paddle; it's spelt padel.
I had the what was the Great Britain Fed Cup team laugh at me when I called it padel to them in a conference once. So I'm glad if any of them.
After all the years you spent laughing at the GB Fed Cup team, that seems fair.
What actually is the thinking there, Calvin? Why have they done that, and why is it such the wrong approach?
It's a different sport. You might as well put some five-a-side football pitches down. Like, it's not even the same. You don't even play with a racket. It kind of looks a bit like, for anyone who doesn't know, paddle's kind of a cross between tennis and squash, I guess. You just play doubles. You play with a wooden or a plastic bat. It's kind of a bit like tennis, but it's a completely different sport. Like, no different than putting some badminton courts up. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. They've done it because I think that they thought it would be a PR move. It's getting really popular. And look, it's a great social sport. It's really good fun to play.
I love it. But, I played it in Vale do Lobo in Portugal, and it's amazing.
It's really good. But can't for the life of me understand why they've put them at the National Tennis Centre. And now they're putting them in. It's part of like the coaching now. Tennis coaching. They're doing paddle coaching courses. The LTA are doing paddle coaching, and it blows my mind. And again, one of the things I should have said about the clay courts as well is that you've got the issue with the climate in that it rains a lot, they freeze up a lot. The other problem is when it's really hot, they dry up really quick. So your water bill, they need watering like every half hour, and that will put the water bill through the roof as well. Because obviously, if you say you've got 4 clay courts, they're going to need a lot of water, and you're going to have to do that every half hour in the summer. So again, clubs aren't really keen on that.
At risk of babbling on about paddle on a tennis podcast, but I've always been interested to know why paddle falls under the jurisdiction of the LTA. Like, where's the LPA? Like, how's that?
Wait, it doesn't. It doesn't. They have an actual. There's a British Paddle Association. They've just gone into some partnership with it. Like, I don't really know the machinations of it, but I can't believe that. One, I can't believe that they've actually. I don't understand why they've done it, and two, it really infuriates me that they took out. We don't have enough clay courts in Britain anyway. We definitely don't have enough covered clay courts, and they decided to do away with 2 of them and put some paddle courts down.
Just on the governance of British Paddle or Padel, it's actually not even called British Padel anymore. It is now called LTA Paddle. They operate it under the auspices.
The LPA, surely that's outrageous.
Well, I mean, let's face it, George. No one talks about the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club, albeit that is technically its name. So if you want to talk about marginalised sports here, I'm all about talking about croquet for the next 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to talk more about Monte Carlo, where Stefanos Tsitsipas defended his title. He beat Alejandro Davidovich Fokina, who knocked out the world number one Novak Djokovic.
This year's NBA playoffs are going to feature a lot of great rookies, and FanDuel wants you to be one of them. Make your debut on FanDuel Sportsbook with promo code ROOKIE, and your first bet is risk-free up to $1,000. So you can bet the point spread, grab the money line, or build a same-game parlay. And if you make a rookie mistake, FanDuel will give you up to $1,000 back in site credit, so you can take another shot. Okay, this guy's got potential. Make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up and unlock your risk-free first bet up to $1,000. We're looking forward to seeing what you're made of.
21 plus and present in Virginia. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Now, it was a great week for Stefanos Tsitsipas in Monte Carlo, as anyone who has watched his 15-minute YouTube blog this morning will know. I probably can't recommend it. Some people say they can't recommend it enough. I just can't recommend it. He won the title in Monte Carlo. He beat Alejandro Davidovich Fokina in the final. But ADF had already had a pretty decent week, beating Novak Djokovic on his return to court. It was a pretty remarkable match, really. I mean, anyone who... And I could probably sit here and talk maybe for the whole podcast about Alejandro Davidovich Fokina, because I think he's my favourite tennis player. He is brilliant to watch. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He plays on clay like he's playing on grass, which I think he would prefer anyway. He throws himself around. Anyone who saw his five-setter with Botic van der Zandschloop at the French Open last year will know exactly what I'm talking about. That was also the highest scoring Scrabble match of the year. But anyway, George, what was amazing about this match, as much as ADF's kind of antics, was that Novak Djokovic got tired. I don't think I've ever said that before.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we've spoken a bit before about kind of match fitness and match sharpness and how difficult it is. But I wouldn't really expect, and again, Calvin will give you a far more expert view on this, but I'm surprised you'd see the fatigue element of it come in the first best of 3 sets match. I'd expect to see that perhaps by the end of a week, if he's been out all season and then he's got through to the final, had a lot of 3-setters, that maybe that could catch up with him slightly. But to kind of get into a third full set kind of implies to me maybe hasn't been playing that much, really has kind of taken his foot off the gas. And the other half is just, you know, has he been playing with people who can challenge him? I'm guessing like a lot of the tour have been hopping around to places he couldn't travel for lots of the time. Has he been able to get good quality practice partners in there? Was he caught cold? You'd have thought he's been practicing in Monte Carlo this week or the last couple of weeks when people have flown over, so that wouldn't have been such a problem there. But yeah, I was pretty surprised. I thought, you know, to be honest, I thought Davidovich Fokina really should have won it in straight sets. I thought he was comfortably the better player. So I guess you'd say Djokovic did well to take it into a third, and, you know, he'll feel a little bit more vindicated by the fact ADF's then got on to reach the final and give Tsitsipas a good match. But yeah, I mean, pretty worrying return.
I mean, he was I mean, yeah, you mentioned he was lucky to get a third set. I mean, ADF was battering him. You know, he was 6-3, 4-2 up. And then, I say he dives around a lot. He made like a ludicrous dive 8 feet behind the baseline that was completely unnecessary. It took all the skin off the top of his hand. And I can't remember who was on comms for Amazon, but they pointed at, like, just spent the next 10 minutes being like, this is so stupid. Like, it's completely self-inflicted. And it did. He, like, lost the break, and I think he lost 12 of the next 13 points. Lost his head, lost the tiebreak, and then won 6-1. I mean, Djokovic's serve was broken 9 times in the match. I'm not convinced that's ever happened. 51 unforced errors over 3 sets. That must be something like a personal best for Djokovic. I mean, Calvin, it's so far from the player that we know. I mean, is this just ring rust, or has something bigger changed?
I think it's ring rust, and I think like what George was saying there about he's surprised that he was getting fatigued so early. It is one of these mystical things that no one's ever been able to pinpoint, this idea of match practice that you can train. And I'm certain, knowing Djokovic as we do, he'll have been hitting the training pretty hard. He'll have been hitting his fitness training hard. But once you get on, I've seen it myself where players can be, especially at the start of the season, you can do a full pre-season doing the 4x400 meters and that kind of thing. And then it comes into a match and they're just getting knackered in a match. And it really is just actual match, competitive, official match practice that they struggle with.
I was going to just touch on your point there about unforced errors, James. The match that popped into my mind for Djokovic, he hit 100 once. It was a 5-setter against Gilles Simon, but I think I'd be amazed if that was topped as his personal.
That's 20%, right? Whereas this was only 17%. So there you go. It wasn't a personal best, but it was remarkable to watch. I think what I found, without wanting to get into the tactics of it too much, because I think it is a bit of an outlier of a match. He just played very safe. Like it felt like he didn't have a lot of like poison in his shots, like not a lot of oomph. And I suppose, against Davidovich Fokina, a guy who does go for his shots, he's got quite a big forehand. He doesn't really hit a massive serve. It's very much a kind of starting the point serve. I guess against a guy like that, you might think it's not a bad way to play, but it was so far away from anything like a competitive way of playing that match.
I guess another point vaguely worth making is that Monte Carlo is quite hard tournament to come straight back into, given its kind of Masters events. You're already playing very, very high level players, but it's one of the smaller Masters events. So, the qualifying is going to be quite a high level in terms of ranking. You're actually going to be coming in quite likely against a fairly decent guy, even as one of the seeds. So, Davidovich Fokina, he's a very good player and has shown that at this tournament, pushing guys hard. So, I'd still, if we're throwing it forward a little bit, I'd still expect Novak to get enough matches under his belt and kind of dust the cobwebs off, etc. But yeah, there were certainly a few more worrying signs there than I was expecting, to be honest.
Calvin, I know you're something of an aficionado of a windy tennis venue. Monte Carlo was particularly windy this week. And, Djokovic, is he not talked about as one of the better wind players around?
Yeah, I'd say he probably is. Yeah, it tends to be like, he's obviously got good hands. He's skillful. He can compete. Yeah, he's one of the best at everything around, isn't he? It certainly was a bit windy last week, wasn't it? A bit more than I can usually remember it being.
But it's the same. But I only bring it up because I watched a number of matches. Carlos Alcaraz. Incredible that the couple of months we've had, and then Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic go 0-2 at Monte Carlo. But that Alcaraz match against Seb Korda was supposed to be one of the best matches of the round, and it just wasn't because it was quite windy and it affected both of them pretty badly. If you're Djokovic now, George, how do you feel leaving Monaco? Downhearted or not?
It's a good question. I sort of said last week about his kind of return that actually his results outside the slams haven't been that important to him over the last 12, 18 months. I think the important thing for him this time around is getting himself back into a position where he's ready to just jump in and win a Grand Slam. That's where this set of tournaments will mean something to Djokovic. If he was obsessed with keeping the world number one ranking, this would be a really disappointing tournament because it's somewhere he didn't do well last year, had a good chance to pick up some points, and another poor showings kind of kept opening the door for other guys to overtake him. I don't really see that as a priority now. I think the priority is pretty much purely Grand Slam wins. So the question for him is, will he get enough matches between now and the French Open to be ready to win Roland Garros? And you wouldn't really say he'd be too worried with that. He'll probably go to Serbia and play the Serbian Open. He'll get some matches in Madrid and Rome. He might not play Madrid. He's skipped that, I think, last year. So I wouldn't be too worried at this stage. But the bigger damaging thing that could potentially come up is, again, losing that air of invincibility that he's had for so long. He doesn't want that going into the slams. Sorry about that.
Have you been interrupted? Calvin was busy yawning because you.
My door just swung open. I think knocked a load of stuff off, and I wasn't really sure. I could see James kind of like weirdly looking around his screen. I wasn't sure if he was looking at me or.
Oh no, I was just. I tell you what I was doing to kind of drag us back into the realms of a professional podcast. I was looking for the people who've beaten Djokovic at Monte Carlo, because I had this impression, and kind of looking at it, it stands up, that actually his record in Monaco over the last, since he won it in 2015, which is the last time he won it, he's not got past the quarterfinals since then. It's weirdly not a place he's actually done really well. The people who've beaten him there since are Yuri Vesely, David Goffin, Dominic Thiem, which is obviously a big one, and Daniil Medvedev, and then Dan Evans, and now Davidovich Fokina. So he, for whatever reason, this has become a place that actually doesn't go very well. I suppose it is probably always his first clay court event of the swing. I can't imagine he would often have played an earlier one, if ever. So maybe we don't take much by this because, he's not played since Dubai, and also it's the first of his clay.
Yeah, and he does always say it takes him 3 weeks to adjust to the movement or whatever, but
he's probably been playing on clay for the last 2 months.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, that would work as an excuse in normal times, but for this particular tournament, he's had a long time to get ready for this. So, yeah.
Anyway, he only played one match, so we probably shouldn't give him too much airtime. Alex, I'm just going to have to call him ADF. I haven't got a chance of actually getting through his name properly. He does at least kind of go by Alex, as far as I can tell. So I'll take that as some sort of a win. But he did make it through to the final, as you mentioned, George. He beat David Goffin, who's been in pretty good form on the clay this year. Taylor Fritz, who's also won a title on clay this year. Grigor Dimitrov in the semis, and then was beaten 6-3, 7-6 by Stefanos Tsitsipas in the final. We've talked a lot about Tsitsipas on this podcast in various ways, and I think he generally surprises us. I think most people, we think, overrate him, and therefore we kind of underrate him or pare that back a little bit. Calvin, I think what impressed me the most, and I know you'll talk about forced and unforced errors here, so I might have to put a time limit on you. But I think what impressed me most is the Tsitsipas backhand is something we've talked about as vulnerable, but I'm starting to think that now we can't do that. It seems like it holds up under most levels of pressure.
Sometimes, yeah. And I think that the courts at Monte Carlo are relatively slow, so that definitely helps him out. And he's tall, so you can't get it to ride up on his backhand. I still think that the best guys are going to pressure it, and it doesn't hold up under pressure in those circumstances. And it's not just a case of holding up under pressure as well. He can't do the damage on it that he can do on his forehand. No one can, to be fair. No one does as much damage on their backhand as they do on their forehand, other than Richard Gasquet. But that's because his forehand's crap. Even like this is one of the sort of the truisms of tennis, really, where people think like the great backhand. I always say that you're in trouble if your best shot is your backhand. You're in trouble in tennis, because even the great backhands like Stan Wawrinka, who has a phenomenal backhand, but if you look at his actual stats, he hits something like, even in a best of 5, it's like 7 winners on it and 38 forehand winners. So it's just one of those. But yeah, he's got his backhand's all right. It's a decent backhand. It's not a great one, and as you alluded to, and one of the data analysts in tennis has indicated today that he's got a great backhand because of the number of points that he won through Davidovich Fokina hitting an unforced error off his backhand. But that's just manipulating stats to suit your own narrative. You could have an argument that he was basically saying that their winners and unforced errors was similar, but Davidovich Fokina hit 14 errors off Tsitsipas's backhand when Tsitsipas had hit a backhand on the previous shot. But that could be because the backhand was so weak that Davidovich Fokina saw an opportunity to hit a winner and he didn't make it. But it's not hard as the difference between forced errors and unforced errors. It's not hard to determine. Let's be honest. Like there might be 2 or 3 in a match that you could have either way. But we know what an unforced error is. We know what forced error is.
Yeah, I don't really know where to pick, which strand to pick up there. I was going to come in and talk about the backhand being the best shot thing. I mean, you'd say someone like Djokovic and Murray, they have the world's best backhands, possibly. But you wouldn't necessarily say they're actually better than their forehands. Their forehands are where they're dictating the play. So that's always quite...
I mean, for those two specifically, isn't it more often a defensive shot as well? Like, the thing we always say about Djokovic is that his backhand is great because he's able to... It's so hard to hit a winner against his backhand. Against Nadal, for example, that forehand that Nadal hits cross court isn't as potent because the backhand comes back with interest.
I say, sorry, George, I just interrupt. I always say this, that a backhand is basically like, if you think about it in boxing terms, it's basically your jab. You're keeping your opponent at distance. You're setting yourself up for something else, but it's not the shot that knocks people out.
I think, there's a lot of, we can do some stuff about backhands in maybe one of Calvin's 1 minute explainers one week, kind of talking about the difference between a 2 and a 1. But to take Djokovic and Murray as examples, the thing that's so good about them is obviously the way they absorb the pressure deep. The way that was kind of the big thing that changed about the Nadal-Djokovic rivalry on clay. It was how Djokovic was able to take that backhand early against the Nadal forehand and not have to kind of overcompensate, not giving Nadal that kind of forehand down the line to kind of kill him. He was able to take, because that backhand was so stable, but he's also good enough to kind of change the direction and put it down the line so well as well. Whereas a guy like Wawrinka has like such a ridiculously powerful backhand, but you can get on top of that backhand. You can really take your forehand into it, keep him pushed back and away. And I think Tsitsipas definitely falls into that mold. He's got a backhand I really like on an aggressive standpoint, and he does a lot of good things with it. But it feels to me like the slice has never been one of his stronger shots, and it feels like you can kind of get on top of him with heavy hitting into that backhand side, and I think better players will do that. That said, for his season as a whole, we were talking about him coming into this season with elbow surgery. I think if he'd have said that, he makes the semis of Australia, he's made a couple of semis in the hard and a final, and now picked up a title in Monte Carlo. Clay is probably where we're expecting him to really kick on and maybe challenge for a slam. I think he's in a pretty good position, Tsitsipas. And I think he's done really well this season, given that surgery leading into it. So I'm actually, we'll maybe have a touch on James's power rankings at the end or whatever. But Tsitsipas, for me, is still comfortably the guy behind Djokovic and Nadal, given that team's out the picture. Everyone will talk about Alcaraz, but if you ask me who's the guy out of those two who's going to win the title, it's probably Tsitsipas still at the moment.
It's funny you mentioned those power rankings, George, because I kind of dipped my toe in the water. Anyone who follows me on Twitter will know that I've started doing this sort of weekly update on where we are in the clay season, who might go and win the slam. And I've started kind of, making it, instead of me picking 10 names out of a hat, a little bit more scientific than that. And I haven't plugged in all the data yet, but the early signs are that Tsitsipas is probably in the best position to go and win it. What's been really interesting is that it doesn't matter what data you use, trying not to have Rafael Nadal at the top is very, very hard indeed. Because
did you have Djokovic top this week?
I did, because it was me picking names out of a hat. But if you do it like using numbers and facts and not like the two birds that run my brain, then it's actually very difficult not to get Nadal at the top of it. Calvin,
wouldn't you have not enough sample size for Alcaraz on that though? That he hasn't played as much.
Well, yeah. So he's played a fair bit on clay. It's going to be tricky because he doesn't obviously have like. So one of the metrics I'm using is wins at Roland Garros in the last 5 years. Obviously, he's going to get massively marked down on that. But because I'm using data from outside tour level as well, so really futures and challengers will play into that, 1 or 2 percentage points. Like, without going through all the methodology, I'm essentially using percentage weighting to about 6 different categories, including like race points this year, career clay court win percentage, clay court percentage win this year. So it's lots of different things. But yeah, Alcaraz, look, sample size is never big enough in sport. We all know that. Like, it's why you can't make money betting on sport.
I was thinking though, it's more that this version of Alcaraz of the last 6 weeks is different than what it's a completely different entity than anything before that.
It's true. Yeah, and there will definitely be eyeballs where it's like, you know, Diego Schwartzman will probably be quite high on the list, but I don't know if any of us think Diego Schwartzman is going to get past the quarterfinals of the French Open. George was thoughtful, and
depends on the draw, as always.
Sits on the fence. Congratulations. To come back to what you were saying about Tsitsipas, yeah, he beats Zverev in the semi-finals, and part of the reason that I wanted to ask that question about his backhand is that there was a lot of backhand to backhand trading in that match, and invariably it seemed that Stefanos came out on top. And yes, the conditions suited him, but that said to me that there's a hell of a lot to this one-handed backhand.
It's funny you bring up that match, and again, Calvin may totally disagree with this, and you can always take his expert opinion over mine, but their two backhands, I always saw them as having completely different problems. Like Zverev was always really poor on like the shorter balls. He was struggled to kind of attack, which to me is where Tsitsipas has always been quite strong. But Zverev is quite a good defensive backhand. He can absorb a lot of pressure. He prefers playing that kind of deeper baseline game. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting that you're saying these backhand wars were won so much more by Tsitsipas. I thought Zverev would do better in that match, to be honest. I know he's out of form, but I'd expect that scoreline to be a lot closer, really, even on clay.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised at that, to be fair, because Zverev has got a good backhand. It's his best shot. That and his first serve are his two best shots. You could argue they're his only two good shots, to be honest.
What about his volleys, Calvin?
Well, I think that you might be able to find me previously talking about Zverev's volleys on one of the other pods or 10 of the other pods. I'll say it again. He's got the worst volleys in the top 200.
I mean, it was. I did write down when watching the match how appropriate it was that on match point to lose, Zverev had an overhead to save it, didn't convert it, and then shanked a volley into the net. It was incredibly appropriate.
Yeah. But I also think that Tsitsipas has got Zverev's number as well. There's obviously a bit of history there and that kind of thing, but he's definitely in his head. So I'd put that as much as anything as the reason for the outcome of that match. I did find it quite funny this week that I'd seen, I don't know whether it's in the press conference after, that Zverev has put himself as one of the current big three in tennis. He said something
said
like
that before, hasn't he?
He says it's him, Medvedev, and who was it? Him, Medvedev, and Djokovic are the big three in tennis.
Is that what big three of what? Big three twats? Is it? That's a bit harsh on him.
It's incredibly harsh on Daniil Medvedev, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but that is strange. Just on a totally tangential note, has Zverev got a new grunt? Because it felt to me like he's got one of these 2-note grunts, which I hate anyway. He's got like a wind-up grunt and then an exertion grunt, but it all happens before he hits the ball. Like it's sort of like an and then he hits the ball. It's
I love the 2-line grunt. The team one's my favorite one. That's how he says. That's how he goes. That's such a good grunt.
I never ever want to hear you make that noise ever again.
What's the one people do with Rublev's? Boy!
Yeah, he has a very strange one. I mean, I don't like grunting at the best of times, but I don't know why it was. It just struck. I don't know. Let us know on Twitter at LoveTennisPod whether that's a new Zverev grunt or maybe just what he's always done.
I don't know about anything else. He needs a new shirt because those sleeveless ones he wears. I mean, come on, you got to have the guns for that, and he hasn't.
And it's just also not that appropriate given what people can call those shirts, isn't it?
Overall, if you're trying to like re-sanitize your image, maybe not the best idea. Speaking of like terrible aesthetics, I made a note to myself to like check Stefanos Tsitsipas's last tweet. Now, because he's been playing this week, he has actually been tweeting about tennis. But anyone who follows him on social media will know every couple of days he tweets something that your aunt on Facebook would be quite proud of. The most recent one I could find: water is the least expensive yet most valuable liquid in the whole universe. Yeah.
Cheers,
yeah, exactly.
Steph.
Cars are the only reason the radio business is still a thing.
Deep.
Not many people know this, but Greece and Cyprus share the same national anthem. Yeah. Steph, we don't need you as a thought leader. Like, just crack on with playing tennis and doing like Head and Shoulders ads and everything will be fine. Right, we're running out of time rapidly. But George, you did want to talk about the number one ranking. You think it's going to be fluctuating a fair bit in the next couple of weeks?
I noted it could be pretty interesting if Monte Carlo results went away. There is a bit of an elephant in the room. I know we just spoke about Zverev briefly there, but he is quite close to potentially being number one. Had he beaten Tsitsipas in that match, really could have opened the door for him. There's still some like weird 2019 rankings going on, aren't there, around this kind of?
Yeah, there are still points. I think it's Djokovic still has points on his record from Madrid 2019, which is completely insane, obviously. But I mean, Zverev becoming world number one. I know we talk about a lot of things a lot, but Zverev becoming world number one while being investigated by the ATP for domestic abuse. And by the way, no one knows what's going on with that investigation that's been going on for 5 months. It took them 3 months to even talk the woman in case. It would be a disaster for tennis.
Yeah, and, there's a pretty decent case to make. He should be serving an actual on-court ban anyway, that aside. That in itself, in terms of an image thing for tennis, is very bad. But there's a pretty legitimate argument he should be serving a ban at the minute for what happened with that umpire. I mean, that was pretty outrageous. That minimum should be a 6-week ban as far as I'm concerned.
Also, not as important as either of those two things, obviously, but it doesn't look great for the tennis rankings. He's definitely not the best tennis player in the world and hasn't been the best tennis player in the world for some time. Like, you could have argued there was a little period last year where he was in probably the best form, but that's long gone now. He's definitely be ridiculous if he was ranked world number one.
Yeah, and arguably this is the most important thing about Monte Carlo this week is the resurgence of Tsitsipas into a bit of a force because everyone else is injured. We need a bit of a Tsitsipas domination really in the next 4 or 5 weeks, probably to cut off any possibility of this happening. I mean, Djokovic, you'd probably still say, if he can find any semblance of form, shouldn't have masses to defend before the French Open. Did he win? Did he get to the final of Rome before winning? Or did he win Rome? He won Rome, didn't he, before French Open?
Yeah,
I'm so confused with the schedule. Yeah.
Well, he'll probably win in Belgrade this week, which would pick him up.
Hope so.
Because he's only defending 90 points there because he lost to Karatsev there last time, so he could pick up 250 there. But yeah, you mentioned the injuries. I mean, there is a very not distant possibility that 3 of the top 6 men in the world will not be at Roland Garros. Or certainly not in any kind of shape because Medvedev has had hernia surgery. Nadal's got this rib thing, which means he might only play 1 tournament before then, if that. And Berrettini's had hand surgery, so there's a real possibility.
I've just seen there's some pictures on Twitter this morning that Nadal is training again.
Yeah, Nadal will be there. I'd put every penny I have on Nadal turning up at the French Open in some capacity.
There you go. If anyone wants to take a £7.35 bet with George on whether Nadal goes to the French Open, then you could make yourself a pretty penny.
Yeah,
but it just
I'm in debt.
But yeah, it would be interesting to see, who can pick up points. I mean, I'll tell you who, he's not going to make world number one in the next 2 months, but I'll tell you who is just quietly moving his way up the rankings and could be like world number 5 by Wimbledon. It's Casper Ruud. Just quietly getting on with his work, picking up points on the clay, showing he can play on the hard court as well. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, where was he in your power rankings, James?
It's a great question. I haven't got them in front of me, but I think I can't remember. You know what? I can't remember. But I don't think on the stats he'll make it in the top 10.
Not the top 10?
Without looking at them, there's half a sniff Alcaraz could get up there. He's got nothing to defend till US Open, has he?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And he's capable of going... He's one of the top 4 in the world, so he's capable of making semis, final, winning any of the tournaments. So it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean,
if he makes semis US Open though, didn't he?
Yeah, but if he, I mean, he's going to go. He's playing Barcelona this week. He'll presumably will play Madrid and Rome. If he goes and picks up maybe 1,000 points total across those tournaments, that'll take him up to 7 in the world straight off the bat. And then, as you say, another 750 points at the French, And I don't know, who knows? I mean, I'm trying to think what his record on grass is like, but there's no I mean, I remember talking to Ferreira about him, and he definitely said that grass would be a surface he should go well on. And if you look at his game, there's no reason he wouldn't, right?
Well, the grass now just plays like the hard, especially at Wimbledon. So if he gets the movement all right and he's an athlete, where did he get to at the French and Wimbledon last year?
French Open last year, he got to the third round, and Wimbledon, he got to the second round. So, there's a lot of points to pick up there. And he'll get a good draw because he'll be a top 16 seed. Carlos Alcaraz is going to dominate the world. I love that, like, we've been saying he's going to take over the world a long time, and then he loses first round, and we're like, there's even more reason he's going to take over the world now. The Love Tennis podcast, where we basically make it up as we go along.
Yeah, maybe it's wishful thinking from us all, but we should become the anti-Zverev #1 slam winner podcast.
Unfortunately, George, Carlos Alcaraz also doesn't have any sleeves, so we're going to have to do something about that, and then we might have the anti-Zverev. I think that really is all we've got time for this week. It just remains me to say thank you very much for listening. Do come back next week. And as always, leave us a rating, leave us a review, drop us an email, lovetennispod@gmail.com. I promise I'll read it.
Sports Social Podcast Network.